Uh, Cody? Are you okay? It was the Flash, wasn't it?
The lightsaber fight. Mirror breakdancing. Mirror master. The forces.
It'll be okay. It'll be okay, man. We'll get through this.
I didn't even. Why?
Guys, I truly don't know what to say. I'm in shock. The Flash Season 7 is quite possibly the worst thing ever put on television. Now, I know I said I was done making videos about the show, and at the time, I really did mean it, but I think we all knew that wasn't the last video and I was just fooling myself. Plus, people have been requesting a Season 7 video for a while now, and it's no mystery why. But if I'm being honest, while I was planning to make this video since basically the third or fourth episode of the season, I wasn't planning to be mean. I thought I'd just sit my ass down, spend about 20 minutes telling you all why it's bad, and move on with my life. See you all next year. But I'm recording this right after watching the season finale. This is my pure, visceral, raw reaction to the final episode of the season, and I speak no hyperbole when I say that it was the worst thing I've ever seen in my life.
Nothing will stop the return of the Sith!
This season made me long for Season 3. Do you understand the significance of that statement? Do you realize just how much it takes to make me say something like that and genuinely mean it? You're gonna want to buckle up, because I mean it when I say you're not ready for this. Those of you who've already seen it, you're the lucky ones, but I know there are some curious people out there who just tuned in to hear some guy on the internet rant about a show that used to be quite something, and I'm sincerely telling you to just understand what you're about to get into. Okay, here we go. Before I get started, there is one thing I want to quickly address. Now, a lot of you have been commenting something that I've been wanting to talk about for a while now, and now definitely seems the most appropriate time to do so. The comments I'm referring to are the ones telling me that seasons 1 and 2 of this show aren't actually good at all, and the only reason I like them is because I either don't remember them well enough to recall just how shitty they are, or I was a kid when I watched them, so obviously I didn't have the critical mindset to judge those seasons fairly. And there are a few reasons why I think this is starting to become the hot new take. Recently, I came across these videos, which are admittedly much more popular than my own. Basically, it's a guy pretending to be a mix of Mauler and Shadiversity, and he's breaking down the fight scenes in every episode of The Flash to analyze just how dumb the show has always been. And look, I mean no disrespect toward Madvocate, because I've watched both videos that he's released so far, and I'm looking forward to his video on Season 3. I actually really like them a lot. Just like when I watch the guys he's copying, I can watch and enjoy his points without necessarily agreeing with all of them. They're very well made and well reasoned, and seriously, I think your day will be made a lot better if you watch them, so I'm putting the link in the description. However, this is something that I want to make perfectly clear for any future arguments made about the show on my channel. I don't really care all that much about fight scenes. When taking a look at the show from the perspective of someone who wants to see cool fights, you're gonna be disappointed, and I kind of figured that going in, considering it's a show about a guy who can run faster than most villains can even perceive. As Madvocate points out multiple times throughout his videos, the only villain who can realistically stand against the Flash is another speedster, and that's why the Reverse Flash works so well as his nemesis. But when I watch this show, I care a lot more about the story itself, which the fights only serve to push in the direction it's supposed to go. You might notice that in every video I've made about the Flash, I haven't ever once talked about the logistics of a fight scene, because I'm instead picking apart the god-awful story. I mean, I pretty much gave up any hope of this show having believable fights when Barry lost to a guy in a hood who shoots arrows, and that was pretty early on in the show. I've made my peace with it. Oh, and put a pin in this argument for now, because there is actually a fight scene in Season 7 that I do want to talk about, and anyone who's seen it already knows exactly what I'm talking about. But I'm calling myself a hypocrite now, so that you can't call me one in the comments That's how that works. And yeah, seasons 1 and 2 are campy and have their moments of cringe, but I still love them both, and nothing will ever change my mind about that. Especially when every new season seems to get worse than the last. I mean, if season 7 made me nostalgic for season 3, how do you think it made me feel about seasons 1 and 2? Anyway, that's enough about the good ones. It's time to talk about season 7, because I seriously meant it when I said it's the worst one yet. I thought season 6 was seeing a potential improvement, because while it was bad, it was at least better than the previous 3, and I found that really refreshing. But while I was watching the finale just now, I kid you not, the only thing I could think was, why can't I be watching the bachelorette party episode in season 4 instead? And I know with negative reviews, I like to talk about the positives first, but honestly, I can't remember a single good thing about this season. I'll come back and amend this part of the script later if I think of any, but don't hold your breath. So to start off, I want to first mention some of the things that I predicted about this season. And what I mean is, in the last video, I basically gave half praises for things that I found somewhat interesting, but there was a little asterisk there next to it because I knew even then that the only reason those things happened at all was because COVID cut the last season short. And if season 6 had been allowed to run its course to completion, well, it would be a different story now, wouldn't it? For instance, I said it was cool that by the end of season 6, Barry still hadn't found a way to get his speed back. By the end, the Speed Force was still dead, and Barry was losing what residual speed he had left. But I knew good and well that whatever they had planned for the season finale would have seen him getting his powers back good as new. Well, season 7, episode 3 was, for all intents and purposes, what was supposed to be the season 6 finale, and it saw the defeat of Mirror Mistress. Trust me, we'll get to that. And Barry got his speed back in what was probably the stupidest way possible, but again, we will get to that. And this one goes hand in hand with my prediction that not only would Barry get his speed back, but the Speed Force would also be essentially resurrected, but I guess one of those things can't happen without the other, so it was a safe bet to assume so. No reason to expect the show to be creative or break off from the status quo. I also predicted that Cisco would leave, and I must say it's about time, but it did happen much later than I expected it would. He was basically in this entire season, but hey, at least he's finally gone for good. However, I will say that his send-off episode was really stupid because it forced this weird manufactured conflict to exist where basically Barry and Caitlin were putting on a strong front and pretending not to be sad that he was leaving, and he didn't seem to be able to take a hint, and then he acted like their 7 years of friendship meant absolutely nothing. That was really stupid, and it made me mad. Oh, this was also the episode where Barry breakdanced. That also made me mad. Oh, and one last thing that I should have predicted. There was a skybeam. I mentioned in my last video that there was no skybeam at the end of season 6, but I should have known better than to actually believe they wouldn't have had one in the original finale. And thank God, I don't know what we'd have done without one. Wait a minute, hold up. Was there one in the season 7 finale? I don't think there was. Oh, fuck! Yeah, but the season 6 finale was pretty awful, both because of how the Speed Force was reborn and how Mirror Mistress was defeated. And I use that word about as loosely as I can, because the way they actually do it is just have Barry and Iris talk to her and make her see the error of her ways. No, you guys heard me right. The big bad who left season 6 on a cliffhanger ended up just having her humanity appealed to.
Which worked, actually.
Now, this part was pretty annoying and made for a pretty weak resolution to the conflict, and if this had been the only time this season that this happened, this would be a much different video. I can get over it if it had just been one time, but no, this happens several times this season. It happened the very next episode after beating Mirror Mistress with Abra Kadabra, and at that point I was already past annoyed. I was goddamn livid, but when it happened again with the Speed Force, I actually wanted to find Eric Wallace and beat him to death with a bag full of Flash action figures. Oh yeah, and Abra Kadabra dies, like, immediately anyway. And he's killed by yet another villain who stops being a villain after like one pep talk. Man, I love this show.
What happens if I kill myself? If I die, then you'll never be created.
Now the good news is, Godspeed wasn't also defeated this way. The bad news, however, is that his defeat is much worse, but I'm getting ahead of myself. So yeah, they defeated Eva McCulloch in an incredibly stupid way, but actually, I hardly even noticed at first because it was nothing compared to the even bigger stupid that had happened the very same episode. So in order to get his speed back, Barry and Iris birthed the Speed Force with the power of their love. Yes, just go with me. But not only do they create the Speed Force with the storm they caused, they also hit 3 random people who were previously just living normal lives and turned them into fucking cosmic forces.
Okay, yeah, sure, that may as well happen.
But don't worry guys, it actually gets better. So not only are these people, who I seriously cannot stress enough were just normal people before this happened, are now gods, but they're Barry and Iris's kids, and like technically, yes, they did create them, but what I found particularly strange about this plot development is that all the forces just sort of accept that. Like, people who, until recently, were just going about their regular lives are just comfortable calling these guys mom and dad. Look, I'm not really harping on the whole cosmic forces thing because this show has always had off-the-walls, goofy sci-fi concepts, and that's one of the reasons I fell in love with The Flash to begin with. I just think it's super weird that these guys are acting like Barry and Iris are their parents. All they really did was give them their powers, but if that's all it takes to become a parent, then technically isn't Thawne like the father of all metahumans, including Barry? So here's something I noticed while these episodes were coming out, and bear in mind that despite everything, I was still thinking the show might actually do something with its own lore, but no. So they kill off Nash this season, which was great, but don't you worry your pretty little head. I know we established already that he was the last Wells because all the rest of them were unceremoniously killed off screen thanks to Crisis, and we were left with this butt monkey who was quite accurately referred to as Pariah during the crossover, but actually no. Nash sacrifices himself so that the multiversal energy he has, because like all the Wellses are inside of him, or whatever, could charge the artificial Speed Force, which they were working on last season. They figured that the next best thing since the Speed Force was dead was this, and actually what's really great is that when Barry does get his speed back thanks to Nash, it turns him into a sociopath and the rest of the team decides he needs to be stopped. Kinda undermines the whole sacrifice for the greater good thing on Nash's part, but honestly, I hated him so much that that made me happy. I won't even complain. But anyway, I'm getting off track. So Nash dies in order to give Barry artificial speed, but in the process, it creates another Wells, because I guess Tom Cavanaugh really has nothing better to do with his time. And because of some sciencey mumbo-jumbo that I'm not even gonna pretend to comprehend, the multiverse had to balance itself by replacing Nash with the original Wells from this Earth that was killed by Thawne all the way back in season 1. Whatever. I say all that to say that when all of this happens, this new Wells comes back with the ability to manipulate time for some reason. Whatever, it's not important. They call him Timeless Wells. Specifically, he has the ability to travel to any period in time that he wants to that he was alive for, and also it gives him the ability to just know how his entire life plays out. And despite the fact that all of that was complete bullshit that I won't even pretend makes sense, it still interested me that they introduced a new character who had the unique ability to manipulate time, and then just a few episodes later, they introduced one of the new forces who had a pretty similar power. And where Wells decided to spend the rest of his days living with Tess Morgan back before her death, this new force, Dion, used his powers over the timeline to constantly relive his glory days as a high school football player back in the 90s. I mean, you can see where I'm drawing a similarity between the two, right? They also introduced one of the other forces, Psych, who had the ability to get inside his opponent's head and show them their worst fears. This type of power seemed to resemble and even contrast perfectly with Cecile's abilities as an empath, and they in fact go as far as to use her to counteract his power in the first episode he's in. And my naive ass thought I was putting something together here. I thought, well, we have two characters with powers that distinctly match those of these new forces, and of course Barry and Nora were both speed, so, you know, there's that. The only one we didn't have was Fuerza, but then again, she was pretty much a good guy as quickly as you could say Abra Kadabra. Anyway, this was back when I still had faith in the show to actually use their massive surplus of characters, but no. They're all doomed to get the spotlight for about an episode, or maybe even get their own little subplot, if they're lucky, before fading into the background to make way for new characters, who will eventually join them in their obscurity later on. Speaking of which, with Nash out of the way, this season started putting a lot more focus on Allegra and actually giving her some agency, which I actually thought was nice, because she spent the entire 6th season being completely useless, and I figured she'd stay that way this season too. Okay, one positive. Oh, but guess who does get her own plotline this season? Yup, you guessed it. Everyone's favorite ice princess. She even gets a love interest, but I think that technically makes him a Caitlyn love interest, even though they're now separate, which means he's gonna die. And you know what? I, for one, I'm fine with that. I fucking hate that guy. Oh yeah, so Caitlyn and Frost are actually separated now, and I cannot tell you how stoked I was for that. I think at this point you all know how much I despise Frost, but even more than that is the fact that I've been wishing Caitlyn would get a little more attention from the writers. And I was hoping with Frost now finally her own person, we could maybe get a Caitlyn storyline this season. Yeah, I knew that was wishful thinking, but I mean, you can't blame a guy for trying. Of course, they still gave Frost her own storyline, and surprise, surprise, it was fucking boring. And it could have been really interesting, forcing her to face the consequences of all the horrible things she did as Killer Frost, because that's something I've always thought this show glosses over way too much. Team Flash has always been a little too forgiving, and I get that Frost really did change for the better, but that doesn't exactly absolve her from all the heinous crimes she committed. And yeah, it wouldn't have been fair to send Caitlyn to prison, so I guess I never really thought about it that much. But I would have liked for that to happen. Maybe she spends like a season in prison and comes back in season 8. Or, you know, maybe we could even just get rid of her and focus on the more interesting characters. No, she gets out of prison like a few episodes later because reasons, and then she just never goes back. I don't even care enough to remember why she was suddenly forgiven for all the laws she broke, but at this point, I don't care. The point is, she's back. And like I said, she's got a love interest now. Yippee. I'm not going to waste much breath talking about him. He's insufferable, and his so-called redemption was completely out of nowhere and not set up at all. But then again, the only thing that was set up regarding his character is that he's a narcissist who likes science and ice, and he's horny for Frost. I can't wait for him to die. No, sorry, I can't wait for him to get iced. You guys get it? And I realized only too late that the only actual reason for this pointless Killer Frost plotline was to introduce this fucking bitch. But as much as I don't like her, I'm at least glad Joe got to do something this season, because it's been a while. Still though, their storyline together wasn't really that interesting, and I kind of just turned my brain off and waited for those scenes to be over. Alright, can we talk about the obvious elongated man in the room? I've been wanting to talk about all this stuff ever since it went down with Hartley Sawyer, which at this point was like a year ago, and I had just put out my Flash Season 6 video before it, so I didn't get the chance to talk about it, but I want to, damn it. Because I kind of forgot that all that happened by the time this season premiered until I realized they were intentionally not showing his face in any of his scenes, and it was hysterical. So like, I don't really care one way or another, and I'm not here to give my opinion on what he said or the state of cancel culture. We'll let the politicians sort that out. But personally, I never really cared that much about Ralph. He was just yet another character who stopped being relevant and was therefore given nothing to do in the later seasons while still being obligated to show up. But I was starting to get interested in Sue Dearborn by the end of Season 6, and I have no doubt that had Hartley's tweets not been dug up last year, Season 7 would have had episodes focusing on them. But they likely wouldn't have been good, and frankly, with everything else the season had going on, I'm glad they didn't try to cram any more into it. But it still made me sad that she effectively had to leave the show because of him. Like, they brought her back for a few episodes, which I guess was nice, but every single time she'd return, she'd talk about some adventure she and Ralph had just had off screen, and it always sounded 10 times more interesting than anything that was going on in the show.
Oh, this is nothing. You should see what Ralph and I faced in Tunisia. It's a photonic stun grenade. Procuring it required 2 trips to New Delhi, a helicopter crash, and a very deadly quinceañera.
Alright, I've put it off long enough, but I've run out of things to say, so I guess let's talk about Godspeed. Alright. I'm prepared to eat my own words, because I remember saying in my last video that I wished Godspeed had been the villain in Season 6. I was just so tired of all the non-speedster villains, and I thought if anyone had the potential to turn this sinking ship around, it was him. And I have never been more wrong in my life. So let me just break this down, make sure I got it right. This Godspeed has been sending clones of himself back in time for the better part of 2 years now for, some reason. Some of the clones don't even look like him, so I don't know, figure that one out for me. But regardless, they're all here, and they're all fighting each other. And this is because some of them are zealots who are just trying to serve the original, while others decided they don't want to just be mindless, subservient zombies and then die, which honestly I feel like is a pretty understandable motivation. I actually think it would have been really cool to have explored that a little bit further, but like, it's just never brought up again. These Godspeeds are literally just trying to live, and considering this show's horribly flawed viewpoints in regards to whether or not killing is bad, I would think Barry of all people would be advocating to help these Godspeeds, but no. Then his children come back from the future, and we spend the rest of the season focused on them, and Godspeed is just seen as a one-dimensional generic villain again. Now, I'm gonna get to why I can't fucking stand Impulse in particular, but first I want to develop this a little further. For years now, this show has been telling us that killing is bad, with absolutely no exception. It's often frustrating how many conflicts would easily be solved if Barry wasn't so adamant about sparing the lives of people who then turn around and murder countless innocents. But that's especially highlighted with this conflict because now they're trying to defeat Godspeed, thus erasing all other clones from existence, including the ones who are literally just trying to survive. But instead of just addressing the fact that this is no different than killing, everyone just goes with it. Okay, sure, whatever. I don't care. I guess it's okay to kill now, so, you know, it'll probably make all of this much easier, right? Because now Barry will have no qualms with just killing them in battle? Right? I don't see how just killing these clones as you're fighting them is any different than the goal you're trying to accomplish, but instead they just knock them all out. And, you know, I bet you can guess what that led up to. They just recharged and nothing at all was accomplished other than the damaging of their own equipment. Oh, and you know how I said the Speed Force is back? well, she's a good guy now, and she has just taken Barry's mother as a constant human form while still calling him dad, and I think it would take an entire video to unpack how that makes me feel. But I'm gonna shelf that because I have another point to make. We get this really neat shot of her just snapping her fingers and like a dozen Godspeed clones just drop right there, so, you know, stakes be damned. I guess since we're still pretending like killing is bad in what's literally referred to as the War of Godspeed, Nora can't just snap them all out of existence, which again, they're trying to do anyway. But could she not just teleport them all into the pipeline or something? She just knocked them down and then they got back up again. My point is they had a literal god fighting alongside them, so any stakes that might have been there are gone, and yet our heroes are still too incompetent to beat Godspeed. And the icing on the whole no-killing cake is the fact that they then bring back Eobard Thawne and have a fucking lightsaber duel with lightning bolts. No, seriously, that happened. There's just... oh, there's so much to unpack here. And like I said, this kind of undermines the whole no-killing thing, because guess what happens? Thawne nearly kills Godspeed. Of course, Godspeed doesn't actually die, because this is the Flash we're talking about, but the point is, Barry brought back an evil speedster knowing full well how that was going to play out, and the only reason I can think of is that he needed Thawne to do his dirty work. And that's really annoying, but you know what? I care way less about that, and a lot more about the fact that Eobard fucking Thawne is back. Jesus Christ, what happened to this show? Did the writers from the early seasons get, like, erased from the timeline? Am I living in an alternate universe? You know how I said earlier that I couldn't think of a single praise I could give this season? Well, there actually was one. I was gonna commend this show for not using Thawne even once this season because I am so tired of his character. He's so overused, and the more they bring him back, the less cool he gets every single time. Despite that, though, I will admit that I was ready to fanboy out here. This entire season may have been dog shit, but hey, at least we could have gotten a speedster fight to end it off. And not just that, but Barry and Thawne fighting side by side against a common enemy? That could have been the coolest fucking shit. And then they had to go and make it a fucking lightsaber fight. And after I recovered from the cardiac arrest, I couldn't help but sit there in stunned silence for the rest of the episode. What in the actual fuck? So then after the fight is over, and Godspeed is defeated and like all of his clones are essentially murdered, even the good ones, Thawne predictably turns on Barry. But don't worry guys, Barry's gotten faster throughout this show. I mean, you'd never have been able to guess, considering even though he gets a major power-up like every other season, his speed has always been written pretty inconsistently. But now he's so much faster than him that Thawne was basically just moving in slow motion, making him no real threat to Barry. Remember what I said just earlier about how each time he appears he becomes less and less cool? Yeah. Anyway, then he gives us a little villain monologue about how he will get faster and he will kill everyone Barry loves, and then zooms away. But Sheev, I'm sure you're asking, didn't you just say that Barry is now way faster than Thawne? Why yes, gentle viewer, I did. One would think he might chase after his lifelong nemesis before he can wreak obscene amounts of havoc on the world he loves, but no. He kind of just stands there, and watches him run away. Good shit, Thawne. See you next season. So then Barry and Iris decide to, like, renew their wedding vows at the end of the episode, and if you're wondering if this was set up at all in any of the previous episodes, or even just earlier in this episode, I promise you it wasn't. You're not losing your memory. And then they do, and their son sings for them, which was pretty cringe, but hey, at least he's got good pipes. It was at this moment that I realized this was why they cast a singer for the role and not someone who can, you know, act. The only other thing I've seen him in is Liv and Maddie, if that tells you anything. Oh yeah, I forgot. I was gonna say something about Nora and Bart, but actually there's not really much to say. Nora's actually surprisingly way better here than she was in season 5, because I guess this version of her is older and more experienced, but don't worry guys, that doesn't mean we're out of the woods just yet. One of them isn't annoying, then I guess the other one will have to do it for both of them. Yeehaw! I'm Bart Allen, aka Impulse, and I am the dumbest piece of shit alive. I blatantly disregarded the rules and phased through a speedster, which should have been really dangerous, but actually ended up being a good idea later. Godspeed is my Thawne, guys, cause he killed my uncle. Nora? No, don't worry about her. It's not like she lost the exact same uncle to the exact same speedster. This is all about me. Sorry, guys. I needed to vent. I think I've at least covered the basics of why this season was bad, and I just don't want to talk about it anymore. I already decided a long time ago that I'm gonna watch this show all the way to its no doubt bitter end, and since we've basically already made this a yearly occasion, maybe I'll take you along for the ride. I still haven't really decided on that part yet. This video took a lot out of me. There is only one more video about the show that's guaranteed to happen, because no matter what I decide or how many years down the line it still may be, I will do one more video covering this entire show when it finally ends. And here's the thing, at this point, this show is beyond redemption. I've spent the last several years having faith that this show would improve, and it's kinda why I made these videos at all, but now I know that's never gonna happen, and even if it does, even if every other season after this is like the best thing ever put on television, it still won't matter. This show has had too many bad seasons in a row, so even if it were to turn itself around, I would still consider it a bad show overall. But thank you all for watching, and I guess I'll see you all next year. Or, you know, you're welcome to watch any of my numerous videos not related to the Scarlet Speedster. This isn't just a Flash channel, guys. And yes, I am planning to do a Superman and Lois video, but the season isn't finished yet, so please stop asking.
What did I say?